So, AEW star Kip Sabian has revealed that he does require surgery. Now, we don't know how extensive this surgery is. We don't know how long Sabian is going to be on the shelf for. But what we do know is that Kip Sabian does require surgery. Now, it's interesting because, of course, they did an angle this past or last week on AEW Dynamite that involved him and Miro. And now it looks like this angle that was done last week in terms of Miro attacking Kip Sabian has been to write him off of television. Now, for the past couple of weeks, Miro has been looking for Kip Sabian after their loss in March to Orange Cassidy and Chuck Taylor in the Arcade Anarchy match. Clearly unhappy with this loss, Miro is refocusing himself as he looks to capture gold in AEW. I think a lot of people, myself included, and we'll touch on this going forward in a second because it does need to be focused on. Miro needs to be involved in singles action. He needs to be challenging for championships. He should have been challenging for championships in WWE. He definitely should be doing it in AEW, so that's worth pointing out there. But anyway, on last week's show, Sabian was in the corner of Penelope Ford for her match against Chris Statlander, but backstage, Sabian finally met up with Miro, only to get absolutely completely destroyed by the Bulgarian Brute himself. Now, at one point during the attack, Miro told Sabian that it was time, quote, to pay his dues and slammed a metal door against his arm. Then he quickly hugged Sabian and said, "I forgive you." Now, Sabian has since revealed that he will need surgery. While he blamed Miro for the surgery, Sabian has not wrestled, of course, since the March 24th episode of Dynamite, where he teamed with Miro in a losing effort to Chuck Taylor and Orange Cassidy. So Sabian tweeted this, quote, "Thanks, Miro. Surgery incoming. Eyes finally open. #superbad." Now, as I mentioned, there's no word on yet on how much time Kip Sabian will miss and how long he's going to be out for, the severity of the injury, all that kind of stuff. So we just don't know at the moment. Look, when it comes to Miro, and I spoke about this briefly then because it is something that I think is worth pointing out. And it's funny. It's funny because when you talk about AEW and when you do throw some criticisms towards them, some people get very angry about that. And I don't, I get it. I do get it. And I understand. I don't. How do I phrase this properly? I understand why people do it because people are very defensive of AEW. They like AEW. If you're an AEW fan, there are a group of people, and I do think they're a minority on social media, but they're very vocal. And I hate to use the vocal minority, that phrase, because it's just so cliche. But there is a group of people on social media that if you throw a criticism at AEW or the programming or certainly logic in terms of storytelling or in-ring action, enforcement of the rules, high spots, psychology, all that kind of stuff, people can get very angry that are fans of AEW. They go, "Oh, yeah, but it's better than WWE and it's better than all this other stuff. It's the best thing ever." And I'm not saying that's not the case. I'm a fan of AEW in the same way that I'm a fan of WWE and I'm a fan of Impact Wrestling and I'm a fan of pro wrestling in general. Like with anything in the world of pro wrestling, it's like music. You like what you like and you don't like what you don't like. And if you don't like something, you can point out and say, "You know what, I didn't like that." Or if you like something, you can say, "You know what, I really like that." And it's opinion. It's opinion. That's what this whole channel is about. It's about embracing your opinion and voicing your opinion and being a safe space to say, "Look, this is what I like. This is what I don't like. I'm not sure about this. I like this. I don't like this." That's what it's all about. And I do think there are elements of AEW that are open to criticism and justifiably so. I think the women's division, and I think another case in point when it comes to criticism, my long-winded spiel and point there, is that Miro, I mean, when did he come in? He came in last year and around the summer. It was around the summertime, obviously. He was part of the group of WWE superstars that were released pretty much 12 months ago as part of the budget cuts related to the pandemic. And there was an element of excitement when Miro was released by WWE because a lot of people thought, finally, we're going to have Miro in a position where he can win a world championship. Because Miro, there was absolutely justification to say, you know what, Miro, he should have been positioned up here in WWE. He wasn't. There was a period of time, of course, when he made his debut on the main roster and he had the Russian gimmick and the Putin and all that kind of stuff. And he had the match against John Cena at WrestleMania and the feud with John Cena. And lots of people look back on that now and say, Cena should have probably put Rusev over in that match. It would have elevated him to the next level and he could have gone to the next level, but that is what that is. That was just the pattern. That was the formula for John Cena during that period of his career. He would go up against these up-and-coming heels, defeat them, and then they would trickle back down the card. But then for a long, long period of time, people were just so, and I was one of these people, watch Miro or Rusev, whatever you want to call him, let's just call him Miro, on WWE television and say, oh, this guy is capable of so much better. He deserves so much better. He is a really, really talented guy, And for whatever reason, they're just not using him. And to the point that he got so over as a babyface with the Rusev Day, the crowd's chanting his name, and he's selling more merchandise than Roman Reigns and anyone on the roster and all that kind of stuff. He's doing great, and they still didn't push him for whatever reason. And he speaks to Vince McMahon, and Vince McMahon says, oh, they're only chanting it ironically. They're not actually chanting for you, all that kind of stuff. So finally, when he was released, people were happy. Not that they're happy to see anyone lose their job, but they were happy because they went, right, Miro can go to AEW, he can go to New Japan, he can go wherever, and he will be successful because he's got that quality about him. He's got the charisma, he's got the look physically, he's a beast. He can go somewhere and he can be a world champion. He can really rise to the level that he deserves to be at. And when he debuted in AEW, everyone was really excited because it was finally, he's going to be featured in a position where he deserves to be. He's going to challenge for the AEW World Championship, and he's going to do these great things because AEW, they recognize talent, and a ton of people have come into AEW that weren't being used properly in WWE and are being featured in a correct manner. Brody Lee was a great example of that. He came in, and within a short period of time, he's challenging for the World Championship. He's the TNT champion. And I think people thought we were going to get a similar trajectory for Miro in AEW, and it just hasn't happened that way. I always found the pairing with Miro and Kip Sabian to be odd anyway. You've got this guy from Bulgaria. He's a beast. He doesn't need to be part of a faction. He doesn't need to be part of a team. And he's paired off with a British guy and his fiancée that are planning for a wedding. That felt really odd. There was no connection going into it. It felt kind of forced. I understand that they were both Twitch streamers, but to be honest, that thread for me feels really loose, and I don't understand that connection between them. And there was obviously a big video game theme, and don't get me wrong, the Arcade Anarchy match was fantastic. I really loved it. I thought it was gimmicky, but the Best Friends, they've got this great record out, don't they, of these gimmicky matches, whether it's the Arcade Anarchy or the Parking Lot Brawl, of delivering great matches, and it was a great match. But still at this point, you're looking at Miro going, realistically, what has he done? What has he done in AEW? And the answer is nothing. And he should be doing more. And I think the element that frustrates me even more is when Tony Khan's been asked about this a couple of times of Miro, saying, you know, what's Miro doing? He's not really doing anything. Tony Khan said, wow, look, WWE really messed this guy up. They really messed this guy up, and it's up to me to fix him, and I'm having to build him back up. And everyone's sort of like, well, okay, that's a reason that you're using. But I mean, he made his debut in August or something last year. I mean, we're coming up to about nearly a year or so. I mean, it's May now, but 3 months? So it's sort of 9 months. Not a lot's changed. And he should be going after a world championship. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to see Kip Sabian go down with an injury. Surgery suck, injury suck. I'm totally not with that. But Miro should have been on his own a long time ago. And Miro should have been challenging for a world championship a long time ago. The idea that we've got to build him up in his win-loss record, you could have done that far, far quicker than what you're doing now. So I'm glad to see that maybe Miro's refocusing on a singles run and he's refocusing on championships. I like the idea of possibly a Miro versus Darby Allin feud in the future. I don't think it's happening in the immediate future because it looks like Darby and Sting are going to be feuding with Scorpio Sky and Ethan Page going forward. So I don't know what Miro does next. I really don't know what he does next. I like the idea of maybe Miro versus Darby in the future. I just like the idea of Miro being involved in the championship picture in the future. Is he going to be involved in the world championship picture in the future? I don't know, because he's a heel, right? He's a heel, and Kenny Omega's a heel. It's just, I don't know what place there is for Miro at the moment. It seems very confusing. As far as Kip Sabian, again, we don't know the severity of the injury. It might just be a situation whereby, I mean, they slammed the arm in the door, the hand in the door. It could be a case he's got a hand injury, he's got a broken hand, he requires surgery. He might be out a couple of months, comes back, feuds with Miro. Even when he comes back, though, and he's feuding with Miro, Kip Sabian shouldn't be coming out on top in that feud. He just shouldn't. So I don't know what the situation is with Kip Sabian. I think he's got something there. Obviously, there's something there with Kip Sabian. He's got the look, and I like the pairing of him and Penelope Ford. But the Miro connection to me didn't make a lot of sense. So hopefully when it comes to Kip Sabian, he'll be able to return relatively soon. And I guess he would continue to feud with Miro. But again, I just don't have that connection. I don't have that connection with that storyline. It just seems a bit odd to me. But we'll move on and we'll talk about Tessa Blanchard again, because we did a video obviously the other day because the report came out. It was reported exclusively by SE Scoops and it was picked up by a variety of other outlets talking about Tessa Blanchard and Daga negotiating with AEW. Well, I got a lot of people talking, obviously here on the channel, in the comment section below, and certainly from myself, that it felt strange. It felt very, very strange and very surprising that Tessa Blanchard would be negotiating with AEW, because AEW have been so firm on when it comes to people like Hulk Hogan being banned from their shows and other allegations and other controversial figures. They don't want to touch them. They have a hard rule when it comes to people that have been involved in allegations of bullying, racist language, sexist language, just all that kind of stuff. They don't want anything to do with it. And they said themselves several times during the past 12 months they weren't interested in Tessa Blanchard, bringing her into AEW for that reason. So when that report came out last week saying that AEW were in deep negotiations with Blanchard and Daga, and both of them were expected to make their debut in the coming weeks, and it was pretty much set in stone, I found that very surprising, and I think a lot of people did. But it looks like that maybe that report may not have been accurate, because we're now hearing conflicting reports, because there was, as I mentioned, the reports going around that AEW was close to inking a deal with Daga and Tessa Blanchard. Now, we don't know much about the Daga situation. That one, again, I mentioned this in the previous video. We'd heard a previous report, a previous independent rumor saying that Daga was negotiating with AEW. That still might be the case, but Blanchard's situation seems to be a bit clearer right now, because during the Wrestling Observer radio show, a recent episode of it, Dave Meltzer stated there is no negotiations going on right now between AEW and Blanchard. Now, there are plenty of people talking about this, but there's nothing to the situation according to Meltzer. This is what he had to say, quote, "I do have to make mention before we go that AEW is not negotiating with Tessa Blanchard. I know people keep asking me about this, and in fact, there is nothing to it. So that's the deal." So that is very interesting, and I know a lot of people necessarily don't like to jump on what Meltzer says sometimes, and people question his validity, his accuracy, and all that kind of stuff. Don't get me wrong, I agree that on certain occasions, and I do think there are certain instances where people mistake Dave Meltzer's opinion for fact, or his predictions for fact, and that's just not the case. When it comes to a lot of things AEW that Meltzer says, to me, they have a lot of weight to them, because he's got connections there. And when I say connections, he's got the highest connection. He talks with Tony Khan. He's been very open in the fact that Tony Khan grew up as a subscriber and a reader of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. Obviously, the Wrestling Observer is incredibly slanted, whether it's Dave Meltzer or Brian Alvarez, towards AEW. It's just a fact. And again, they have very good connections. Meltzer speaks regularly to Tony Khan. So I think it's probably a scenario whereby that report came out last week saying that Tessa Blanchard was in deep negotiations with AEW and she was going to sign with AEW very, very soon, and a deal was going to be signed in the very near future. I'm sure it was as easy as Dave Meltzer just to pick up the phone or send a message to Tony Khan saying, "Is this legit?" And Tony Khan goes back to him and says, "Nope, not happening." I think it's as simple as that. And if Dave Meltzer is saying that Tessa Blanchard to AEW isn't happening, it's most likely because he's either spoken to Tony Khan or someone very, very high up in AEW that said, "Nope, no truth to that matter." So it looks like that the Tessa Blanchard to AEW situation isn't happening, which again, that's not surprising. To be honest, the most surprising thing about this whole Tessa Blanchard AEW story was the initial report that they were close to signing. I found that bizarre, considering that AEW have been they've made their position very clear on stuff like this in the past, and they've openly said, "We're not interested in Tessa Blanchard." So what would have had to have changed during that period of time? It looks like nothing has. It does lead people now to look in the direction of WWE. I always felt that Tessa Blanchard going to WWE was a more viable option, a more realistic option, because when it comes to the negative PR that is going to be associated with Blanchard signing anywhere, WWE doesn't care. WWE has never cared about bad PR. They just don't. Whether it's the Velveteen Dream, whether it's a variety of people in that whole speaking out movement that are still there, whether it's their deals with Saudi Arabia, whether it's various other issues when it comes to third-party platforms, independent contractors, Twitch, YouTube, Cameo, you name it, firing people during the pandemic, they don't care. And that's just in the last 12 months alone, let alone their whole history. So they don't care about negative PR. So when it comes to Tessa Blanchard, I still think she'll end up in WWE. I wouldn't even be surprised that whole Diamond Mine thing that's going on in NXT right now, if that's about Tessa Blanchard. And Tessa Blanchard, the rumor of her signing with AEW was just a misdirect by WWE to try and throw people off the scent. Maybe that's the situation. I don't know. So if Dave Meltzer is accurate, which I think in this case he probably is, I think it's more likely that Tessa Blanchard ends up in WWE once more. And finally, I do want to talk about this before we wrap up this video. Talking about Chris Jericho. Now, Chris Jericho's done an interview recently where he's revealed his official AEW position, and he's also spoken about if there are too many factions in AEW, which is something I do want to talk about. I know we've addressed it a couple of times here on the channel, but I think it does worth repeating. Now, former AEW World Champion Chris Jericho was on a recent episode of Sunday Night's Main Event with Dan Lavransky. Now, officially, of course, Chris Jericho is not an executive vice president like Cody Rhodes, the Young Bucks, and Kenny Omega in AEW, but he has explained his role in AEW and why he doesn't want to be an EVP. This is what Jericho had to say, quote, I think I literally have a position as senior advisor to the CEO. When they were talking about EVPs and all of that sort of thing, I was like, I don't want to have anything to do with that because these guys are doing a lot of work at the beginning, finding sponsors, going to Cracker Barrel, helping book towns and doing all this kind of stuff. And I was like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. But when you're talking about the creative side of things, I mean, obviously I worry about what Chris Jericho's storyline is first and foremost. I don't know if I have a lot of say. Obviously, Tony's the boss. And that's one thing that's really grown over the last year is that people understand, and I knew it from the start, but I think a lot of the guys thought, oh, we're a big committee and a big team. No, there needs to be one boss, and that's Tony Khan, and then file down from there. So I have some say when I'm asked my opinions, but I also don't know everything that's going on the show, nor do I want to, because worrying about 30 or 40 different storylines is quite a lot of pressure. Tony loves that. He's a stats guy. He's a number guy. He can remember all of that stuff, and I think he really enjoys that. So that's interesting. I think Jericho saying that he's senior advisor to the CEO. There's a couple of senior advisors in AEW. So Jericho is obviously saying that he's a senior advisor to Tony Khan. I'm pretty sure Jim Ross has a senior advisor role. I don't know, and I wouldn't want to speculate or guess what that means financially or anything like that. I think it's just a case of, a bit like Jim Ross, a bit like Jericho, when you've got these more experienced guys in the company, you have to remember a lot of those guys, and they're getting more and more of them in, but a lot of those guys maybe hadn't worked on television before and don't know the inner workings of how a big company works, especially when it comes to a pro wrestling company. So if they're asked, like Jericho is saying, if they're asked his opinion, he'll ask him about it. And of course, having Jericho in an advisory role makes a lot of sense as well. Now, another thing that I did want to touch on that he spoke about is the faction issue in AEW. Now, AEW currently has a multitude of factions and tag teams on the roster, and the Young Bucks recently defended their use of them. We did a video talking about this where they said it's easier to book people and all that kind of stuff. Jericho gave his thoughts on the criticism and explained why it is a benefit. He said, quote, it's not something I've been privy to, but what I think is Tony Khan likes factions. If you work in New Japan, everyone's with a faction. When I go there, I feel lonely because it will say so-and-so is part of this faction, and then it's Chris Jericho solo. I got no friends. I think he likes having the factions, and here's the real reason why, in my opinion, you have to ask him, is I think he likes having the people involved. And everybody on our show has a purpose and a point, and I would never suggest that someone doesn't get TV time. So when you put together, for example, The Factory with QT, and then now Anthony Ogogo gets TV time and Nick Comoroto, my point is that they're getting TV time and they're on the show, which they wouldn't be if they weren't involved in this faction. I know one of the things people were saying was there's 75 people on Dynamite last night, and that may be true, but look at what we're doing on that Dynamite where there were 75 people. For example, the main event was Jungle Boy versus Darby and the crossover with Shida and Tay. We're building our own stars, and if you have to see 75 people on the show, just go with it, because out of those 75, hopefully over the next 3 or 4 years, we will build them all into stars. Some will be opening match level, some will be main event pay-per-view headliners, but that's how you get started. Giving these guys experience, getting their face time on TV where people know who the hell they are. And that's very important when you're trying to build a company from scratch, which is what we've done. I think Jericho, when he says that, look, when it's about, I understand his point. I understand his point there where he's saying, you know, if we get all of these people on TV, at least a couple of them will become stars. And he's kind of admitting there that they're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. I think it's more likely what the Young Bucks said. I think they are going with the New Japan model, and I don't have a problem with that. And that's been successful in Japan, and it hasn't really been done over in North America or anything like that. So it's different, and maybe people are trying to adjust to that. So that's one thing. I think that's the complaint that some people have. I do think their roster is bloated. I think that's fair, and I think there probably are too many people on there, and I think the issue that they have is they've got so many people under contract, so many people on that roster, it's hard to get on the show. And like Jericho said, to get on the show, you just have to be part of a faction, because otherwise you ain't getting on the show. And that is a problem. That is going to become a problem eventually. And there obviously is the rumors about having the second show on TNT, and maybe that will open things up. My concern would be that you get to a point, a bit like with NWO on Nitro or on TNT in the Monday Night Wars, where it's a bit like, eventually, it's the one person who isn't in a faction who starts to get over. You know what I mean? I mean, John Moxley's in a tag team right now with Eddie Kingston, but maybe it's going to get a bit like that with like DDP in the NWO, or Sting before he was in the Wolfpack. It's a bit like, I don't want to be in a faction because I want to be something different. That was like that with Jericho. I don't want to be in the NWO. And I think maybe it's going to get like that in AEW. I don't know. So I think reality is, and I said it before in the Young Bucks video, we're trying to get everyone on the show, and we're trying something different with the New Japan model. I just think sometimes, and he mentioned like the factory of QT Marshall, realistically, who cares? Who really cares for that faction? I think everyone, when that faction was made, they rolled their eyes. And I know we've got QT versus Cody on Blood and Guts this coming Wednesday, but it's a bit like, I don't want to say nepotism because it's not the right word, but that one does scream like, Cody's trying to get his friend and trying to get his students on camera, and I don't know, it just feels more of an extension of the Rhodes saga on AEW, and it's just a bit like, enough with the factions, enough with the Cody Rhodes stuff. We get it, right? We get it. And it feels like a way of, we're trying to get everyone on the show because we don't have any other way. You don't have to sign them to contracts, though. That's the situation there. It feels like maybe they're padding the roster, hoping for that second show on TNT coming soon. I don't know how that happens now that Turner Sports have acquired the NHL. There's a lot of confusing situations when it comes to AEW on that matter. So I think the factions topic is a great topic to debate. I really do. And maybe we'll do it at a longer form at the channel at some point, because look, more are going to come. More are going to come. And to be honest, we have Wednesday. Blood and Guts is centered around two factions. So it's certainly an interesting topic. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Kip Sabian revealing that he has to have surgery, Tessa Blanchard not signing with AEW, and Chris Jericho revealing his official AEW title, as well as discussing the factions topic in AEW? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about AEW, WWE, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, get the rankings, and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.